Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm Daniel Torres. If this is the first time you tune into this show, we speak here with the top voices in the consumer goods and retail industries. We are now over 160 episodes in, so do go into our website or your favorite podcast platform to entertain yourself and hopefully be educated with some of the industry's top voices. Remember, we are part of a family of podcasts, which is headed by the CPG guys in the US. So if you're curious about the omni-channel consumer goods world in the other side of the Atlantic, go to their show. I forget how many episodes they've done because they've done a lot since 2020, and you're up for a treat and to learn a lot. So if you haven't yet, remember to follow us on LinkedIn, where you'll join a community of 15,000 members and counting. And now you can also find us on Instagram, where you'll find our latest and upcoming content. And hopefully we'll cut through the noise more than on LinkedIn, where sometimes I know it's difficult to reach you and keep you updated on our last episodes. And yes, I'm not alone in the room here. So please welcome my co-host, Efrain Rosario. Hey, Efrain, how are you?
Good. Nice to be with you as always, Daniel.
Likewise. So this year, we've talked a lot about the digital shelf, both from the agency and brand side. And today we're going to go halfway practically with someone who's done it in both agency and now brand side at Ecotone. So please welcome Jon Trevor, Global eCommerce Manager at Ecotone. Hey, Jon, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. Yeah. How are you guys?
Very good. We don't have a nice penthouse like you in London, but we'll get there one day.
Yeah, good stuff.
So Jon, tell us a bit about Ecotone and what the brand portfolio is. And I know there's a strong inclination towards biodiversity, and you're proud B Corp as well.
Absolutely. No, Ecotone's a fantastic manufacturer. It's probably in the mid-range in terms of size. Everything's about biodiversity, so a huge focus on organic, plant-based, being the future, the answer to a lot of the environmental problems. They have a big focus on not using pesticides, organic, good for the planet, sustainability, and all kinds of other wonderful things like women in leadership as well. So it's a really wonderful company with loads of great brands as well. So there's lots of local brands and a few global brands. So some of the brands people would recognize, like Clipper Tea, Cuppa in some countries. We've got Whole Earth peanut butter. We've got Bjorg, which is massive in France and big in Italy, and a whole host of other local brands like El Granero in Spain and a load of other ones that I won't quite remember, but quite a big portfolio. But everything is either kind of organic, sustainable, good for the planet. That's the whole kind of thing of the brand portfolio.
And it's all foods, right? It's all plant-based.
It's all food, yeah, plant-based foods and all this kind of stuff. And it's B Corp, and a little kind of fancy kind of accolade is that it's the highest scoring food manufacturer in the B Corp ranking. So yeah, fantastic company. And I've been with the company just coming up on 2.5 years.
Excellent. So can you tell us a little bit about your role at Ecotone? And also I'm curious to hear about your background as well.
Yeah, sure. So my current role is Global eCommerce Manager. I've been in role kind of nearly coming up on 2.5 years, like I said. And my role here is essentially to help enable the local teams, and essentially manage the tech stack as well. So we, I control the tools, if you like, to enable the local teams, which we can get into kind of some of those in a bit. But my background, I've been around FMCG since about 2004, so kind of 20 years. Started out at Kantar, back in my first role as a placement student. Then spent a few years at Nestle in sales, marketing, and a Tesco global team as well. So I've been in a couple of global teams over the years. Went to dunnhumby for a few years. That was a natural kind of step from working in that global team. And again, did various roles: insight, media, retail media, and probably the most impactful role was Tesco.com, because that was my into e-commerce. And dunnhumby back then was a fantastic place to be. I mean, I'm sure it still is, but back then it was great. And I always had a good time because I spent more time in the Tesco head office than I did in the dunnhumby office, because you got to hang around with the buyers. And I found it was a great strategy to kind of help my clients, get what they wanted, because I was alongside buyers, and you'd be able to say to them, oh, hey, look, these guys on Highland Spring or Mars or Coca-Cola are doing this great stuff. Look at this great plan they've just done. And then it would get back to the manufacturer, my clients, and they'd hear about it, and they'd say, oh, thank you for saying that great thing about us, So you had this interesting kind of dynamic there, and we some really good times. And then after dunnhumby, I did a couple of short-term things, including a stint scuba diving, in the Caribbean, and then came back and got serious again and joined up with Clavis, which then became Edge, which is now Flywheel. It's gone through a few iterations. And that was really, over the last few years, my digital shelf kind of space. I was there for about 6 years, started off managing big clients, like RB and Essity and various clients like that.
Which have been on the podcast, most of these, by the way.
All the big ones, I'm sure, But yeah, it was really good times, because it was quite new at the time. Digital shelf was still a new concept. So we did loads of training, loads of enablement. And I flew all over the world doing these sessions, trying to bring, upskill teams on what it was and how to measure it and what was important, and kind of those early transformation things that are now pretty embedded, entire teams built around it. But yeah, it was a really interesting time. And then I moved more into custom advisory kind of roles, where you build custom solutions to problems. And that kind of led me then to, I set that up in Clavis. And then once we got acquired, I got rolled into a bigger team. And yeah, we did loads of custom solutions, finding, getting data from places, scraping data, crawling data, that kind of stuff, and doing some really interesting analysis with it. And then COVID hit, and then no more traveling, so we switched into webinars, this kind of format on Zoom.
And you probably went during COVID is also through like an evolution from the customer side, like from you having to kind of push them to invest in the digital shelf, to probably them coming to you or like asking for solutions directly, no?
100%. It was all of a sudden the growth went through the roof, and everybody wanted a training session. So, before you had to kind of push, like you say, to get that investment. It was a new thing. Why do I need to care about it? Kind of e-com's only 5% or 7% or something. Why do I need to invest behind it? Just suddenly everybody throwing money at it, and had more work than we could kind of handle. And it was a really interesting time, because 2 or 3 times a week you'd have 700 people from a J&J or something on a call, or you'd have these huge audiences listening to you about digital shelf. So it was a really exciting time if we weren't so locked up, and couldn't go outside, So yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, and how did you go then from working on the agency side, really training 700 people in the likes of J&J, which is considerable, to taking a role in-house at Ecotone?
Well, that's a good point. So I left Flywheel Edge at the time, and my boss, the guy that hired me at Ecotone, was the guy from Essity, who I did a lot of this traveling around with. So it's all about the personal network. There was he reached out and mentioned there was a role, and it was a new global team. So I joined 2.5 years ago. The global team was like 3 years old. Brand new. So that's kind of an opportunity too good to pass up, really, where you can go in right at the start, you can set things up, you can kind of guide things a little bit, and use all this knowledge from, being around these global teams. You can see the pitfalls, you can see the things they do well, the things that could be improved on, and kind of put that in place. So I think it's important not to just get too caught up in the theory, and be a practitioner sometimes, and then you get that experience on the two sides. So that was 2.5 years ago, and it's been a great ride so far.
And what's the scope of your role currently at Ecotone? Because I know that you have a focus on managing like the tech stack and providing services and capabilities to local teams.
Yeah, and so my kind of role falls into a few areas. There's digital shelf is a big one, So I run all the tools, and I actually created all the tools. I have a team that just looks after that. We have a tech team that just does digital shelf and maintains that. And we can talk a bit. That's worth kind of diving into a little bit. But there's also retail media is an area of mine. But again, I'm not the one booking campaigns. I'm not the one with my fingers on the keyboard there. It's more about the reporting and best practice and sharing amongst teams, because some of those things like retail media will always be local driven. You're always going to have a trade manager or a marketing manager or something in the local team kind of doing those things. So again, it's enablement, and reporting in those kind of areas. And then there's also kind of now more than ever, it's just this general kind of technology kind of role, where we go outside of e-commerce and it's getting more into the digital transformation, because e-commerce is a bit like a playground. There's so many problems to solve. There's so much tech you can build that naturally kind of bleeds into other areas, and AI is obviously a big one, that everybody's kind of talking about. How do you make sense of that? What do you use? So those kind of things are falling under my role at the moment. And you get involved in other things that are going on as well.
So I'm fascinated to hear you say that you're actually building a lot of these tools in-house. And I imagine, well, first off, I'd love to hear more about that and your approach within Ecotone in terms of like build versus buy when it comes to some of these digital tools.
Yeah, definitely. So when I joined the business, they'd had a year of trying to roll out a digital shelf tool, from one of the big players, and all the classic problems that you come up against with these systems had happened, like data quality, loads of effort, loads of maintenance. So when I joined, the team were coming to the end of that, and they'd kind of lost interest. It was kind of hadn't worked out, and so I said to them, well, look, I write a bit of code, I know a bit about this, let me build this from the ground up, a system, and we'll build it custom for what everybody needs. So that's what we set about doing. So in my spare time for fun, I was building crawlers, scrapers, where you get that data. So I knew a bit about that. And we started out with a few different countries, so UK, Germany, France, Spain, and we got a list of all the retailers that we wanted to look at, and then I just set about building those. Not just me. I hired a little, a core little team of people to help me do that. I'm not doing everything myself. But then you start building, you get like a minimum viable product, and then you start showing people insights, like I found these things that are wrong. So, and for marketing, you said, oh, hey, look, have you ever seen your reviews? Look, here's all your reviews in the UK, for example, on all our products. Did you know that people are saying this? Or you might have a problem on the lids on this particular, jar of peanut butter or something. People keep talking about it. So we started sharing that kind of stuff around, which got people interested. People are like, hang on a minute, that's quite interesting. That's quite cool. Let's hear more. So you kind of drop bits in. There's no big gap for where you're trying to build a system. And then we just kept adding to it. So I started building, databases, started building schedulers, getting my own servers so that you can automate all of this, and then it goes into dashboards, so you start building exactly what you'd expect from these kind of systems. We built it, without going into it.
Jon, just to kind of boil it down to like the core elements, like for maybe somebody in our audience is thinking about kind of going down that same path or is thinking about evaluating off the shelf options. What are those key areas that you would think about in, like, when we say digital shelf, quote unquote, what does that really mean? Like, are there certain key areas that people should be thinking about, whether they choose to build themselves or buy off the shelf?
Oh, sure. I mean, the digital shelf, for all the sort of innovation talk and everything you see on LinkedIn, there's only a few things you need for it. You need your search results, because then you get all the products. That's how you find them in most cases. Maybe the category in some cases, but mostly it's going to be search. And then in search, you get prices, you get the share of search, you get the sponsored search. So you already get a pretty valuable set of data just from getting search results. Then you get the products, the product pages. So they're from when you're scraping a product page, you get all the PDP, as you hear it called. You'll get things like the product titles, the descriptions, the bullets, the images, and you get all the links to all of these images as well. So later on, you can download them and do stuff with them, the ratings and reviews, that kind of stuff. Then you might want to get the actual ratings reviews. So you go and scrape what people are saying, and then you can do a bunch of other stuff on top of that. And pretty much, if you have a system where every day, every morning, you're going to go and get that data, and it's going to go into a database, and it's going to clean it, and it's all going to be good data, and you trust it, then you can build anything on top of that. You can build any kind of templates, you can build any kind of analysis, you can run queries, you can fill a dashboard with all that kind of stuff. Everything leads off the back of that. So at the core of it, you need to be good at scraping. That's where most of these things fall down, because anybody can build a dashboard. Anybody can build an Excel template or something, but not everybody can scrape data at scale reliably every day. And I think the thing to think about there is that websites change, and you've got to change your scrapers every time. So you need to maintain this fleet, if you like, of scrapers every day. And so if you're gonna do that, you've got to have people in place that are going to maintain it. And that's a big one.
And I have one other question, which is like, obviously, not obviously, but with eCom, it is something that it pretty much touches a lot of functions within the business, right? So you're dealing with a lot of, like, let's say, varying types of end users, where it comes from like sales, marketing, people who work in digital or eCom specifically. And I'm curious, like, not just in terms of building the actual tools, but then you mentioned dashboards, and I'm just wondering, deliverables for those different audiences, is that something that fell into your remit as well?
Totally. And I think it's really interesting, because I spent years trying to get people to use these tools, on the other side of it. And usage is always the big problem. Any major company, have whatever the size, getting people to use these tools is the biggest challenge. But we don't need to worry about that. We just want people to take actions off the back of it. So we have a different strategy where if they want to use a dashboard, we report on the numbers, scores, and all that kind of stuff. And the reviews go in there every day. So if you want to look at it, it's there. And we report on those numbers every month, with the local teams. We have an action meeting. So we tell them, this is how you're scoring. This is you going up or you're going down. But to be honest, most people are not going to do that. Most people are not going to log into the tool. So we've got this thing, well, we just want people to see it. We want people to see the actions. So if they want to have an email with an Excel dashboard, or they just want the content in the email, that's what we do. So we have all these delivery methods, where we get the data, we clean it, we put it in a format someone wants, and then send it to them. And there's some really interesting things. If you break it down by the functions, you have salespeople care about pricing and availability. So those are the two things we give them, and pricing is an interesting one, because normally you'd pay an agency for that. You'd pay an agency to deliver that kind of data, but we get that from search anyway. Pricing is in search. So all you've got to do, a giant database query, you put it in a nice big calendar, put some colors, top, lowest, highest, all this kind of stuff, logo on it, make it look nice. Bam, that goes out every day. A year's worth of pricing every single day, and our RGM team, the revenue growth team, they love that, and our account managers love that. So, and funnily enough, that's probably the most popular thing I do, and it's nothing to do with e-commerce, which is a bit kind of, a bit of an interesting one. But it makes us relevant. It gives us relevance, because we're giving them data that then they don't have to keep going and checking. They can just check this, template, and see, oh, well, that's when the prices changed, which at the moment, over the last couple of years, with all these price increases all over, everybody's watching the market. Everybody's watching competitors to see who moves when. And we've got that, for 50 retailers, we're tracking 100 retailers. So we're tracking a huge amount of this all over the world. So at any point, you've got your pricing, which is pretty useful. And also, if you're thinking about launching in Japan or Australia, it's useful to know which brands are there and what prices they are. That kind of stuff is pretty useful. So so sales is kind of handled, and they get availability alerts each day, tell them what's in stock, what's out of stock, and then that's sales. They're happy. Marketing is all about reviews. So they just want to know what's going on with the shopper. So we have the dashboard with word clouds and all that kind of fancy stuff that they like. They can put nice presentations. And we do, since the rise of AI, we have AI summaries once a month that goes in and tells them what's good, what's bad, how do they compare versus competitors, what are the features they need to think about, or anything that's going wrong. It might be a lid problem or a leakage problem or whatever it is. You'll see it, kind of thing. So that's marketing kind of handled as well. And then we have our kind of e-commerce community, which care more about content. Show me the images that are right, show me the ones that are wrong. And again, with AI, these vision models, you can do some really cool stuff now, whereas you used to have like a team of people that would look at these images. You don't need that anymore. Now you can just feed it all into the AI and say, well, pick out certain parts of it and tell me if it's optimized or not, and if you can read this and compare it to over here, and you can find mistakes. So, we kind of handle our different departments based on what it is they want. And we don't care if they log into a platform or they read it in an Excel file or an email. the point is that they do something with it, like the action. The whole system doesn't make money from the plan or tracking. It's the action, that makes the money, sort of thing. So that's what we want them to focus on.
Can you give me an example of when you mention like the images that are right or wrong and the content for the e-commerce teams? Like, what can you give us a real life example of that? Because I'm pretty interested.
Oh, sure. So we had a recent example in Spain where we redid a whole brand. The El Granero had a complete brand refresh. So all the packs are totally different. So we send these images. It's a bit old school in some of these retailers where you send a zip file. There's no syndication capability. So we're sending a zip file of these images, and someone on the other side of that retailer goes and uploads all these images. And you go, right, okay, perfect, it's done. So you assume it's kind of gone right, but then we run our analysis each month. We just do it once a month because that's kind of that's all anybody needs really. You could do it more often, but we run about 5,000 images through the latest kind of vision models, and we say pick out the size, pick out the brand, pick out the variants, which you couldn't do that before these vision models, and the tech just wasn't good enough. But now you can trust it to do it really well. And then we do the same with the title. So you pick out the size, the brand, the variants, and then you can compare those two things. So you can compare the size as an example. So if the image says 1 kilogram and the title says 500 gram, you've got a problem. And so we did this for our our Spanish team, and there was like the retailer had done it quite wrong. There was like 60 different products where it was completely different to what it should be. And so you can highlight, wow, there's been quite a big mistake here. And we take that really seriously, because if someone buys something thinking it's going to be a kilogram and it's half a kilo, it's half as much, they're going to leave a negative review, or it's going to be a bad experience. So we use that as quite a serious thing. Each month we report on that and check. And it's all automatic, once a month.
AI, then there's also an AI use case, right?
It's all AI. I mean, that was in the last few months, that is, because the vision models have only got good enough to do that, and the latest one they just brought out kind of does that, slightly better. But, I've had that for a few months where, every time something comes out, I'll test it. Does that help with the job that we're trying to do? And can I replace something that was manual, with something that's automatic, and that's the whole point, is you make this whole system as light touch as possible.
So I'm curious to hear about, I guess, connecting that digital shelf data to sales, right, or attribution. And I'm curious to hear how you may be doing that. And I don't know if you're doing it for a specific retailer, and maybe if you can explain to us, like, how, maybe at a very high level, if you're doing it, how it's being done, and maybe like what is one of the actions that's come as a result of it.
Definitely, no, it's a great question. And so data is for some of these retailers is really hard to get, for e-commerce data. So some of them in different countries, or it's very, very expensive, or you have to pay, it's spotty as well. Like somewhere it's there, sometimes it's not. So we tend to go more for where we can automate things, and a lot of these retailers will send you a spreadsheet or something. It's not like a feed that you can get. So one way we do it really well is Amazon, because you can plug into Amazon, you can plug into their API, which is just, machines talking to machines, so instead of going and manually downloading it, you're querying the Amazon systems, you set up all the keys and everything, and they talk to each other. So we have all of our systems, like, so for Amazon, we scrape every day, we scrape all of our products, we know what we're selling, and so we go and scrape them. And we have the IP addresses in exactly the place it needs to be, and if we're doing it in Spain, you can go down to the zip code, because the portfolio is totally different for Amazon Fresh in Madrid versus Granada or whatever, so we sometimes have to go really, really precise. So we know we're getting good data on what's going on Amazon, and then at the same time, every night, our systems are querying Amazon and downloading the sales, the traffic, the net PPM, everything else that's in there as well, forecasting data. And so that goes into a database. So we've always got bang up to date, which is about 2 days ago for Amazon. And then because those things are all sitting in our own databases, you just do a couple of queries and connect them. And for Amazon, if a product has lost the buy box or been out of stock, so, if it's not Amazon selling it, it's some third party selling it, you've got a problem. And if that has been out of stock for 10 days, and the average daily sales are like €100, say, then you've lost €1,000. because that's been out of stock for 10 days. And so that's probably our most simplistic example of it, because when you put a number on something, it suddenly becomes important. Like if you suddenly know, like, hang on a minute, we've lost 10 grand here from this product being out of stock, what's going on there? That has power internally. When you're talking to supply chain, you can go, look, quick, solve this. This is worth this much money. Or if you're talking to Amazon, like, hey, do you just turned that off and you've just crapped that out and it was worth like, you've just lost like 20 grand or something. Like when you kind of put these numbers
put a
on,
number to it, people all of a sudden start paying.
Yeah, people sit up and listen. So that's been really useful. And we do that for our availability reports, because that's just a really simplistic one. But we also then have that data to connect to our content. So I know when something changes, and then you can say like, well, that changed on this date, and what happened to the sales? What happened to the conversion? So it really helps validate what we're doing when we're creating content and those kind of things as well. If you've got that data by day, which is really hard. You'd have to do that manually in Vendor Central. It's like a nightmare to get that kind of stuff. So having these automated systems is just glorious. You connect everything together, and you can build these stories with it.
Yeah, and you talked about before you talked about the actual content part, and like that's super important, especially for your e-commerce community. How does that content creation process look like in-house? Because I know, like with digital assets and so on, how do you automatize or have like a center of excellence for that? Because everyone could have an opinion a little bit, no?
Absolutely, and this is probably the one where there's some elements you just can't automate. You're never going to trust the machine to kind of make all your images, but there's certain elements we identified pretty quickly that we needed to have in place. Like we didn't have a global DAM, like a digital asset management system. We didn't have somewhere to put all the images, so that was the first thing we needed, because everybody had kind of share drives or SharePoints or maybe a local DAM, this kind of stuff. But there was no over the top system. So the first thing we had to do is get one of those. So I looked externally, and also I looked at open source, which is essentially free. You run it on your own servers. And so I found a solution called PIMcore, which is fantastic. It's open source, it's free. And I put it on my own servers. I got one of my team to upskill on it. And so we now have a DAM, an internal DAM, where we control the storage, we control there's no per user cost. So that was the first thing we did, is get the tech to be able to store images effectively, or store content. We then used all the tracking tools to say, well, where have we got a problem? And again, using that AI system of like, well, if half the images don't have a size on this brand, we know we've got some work to do here. So you'd identify the brand, and then the hardest part about getting brand managers or local markets to do anything is budgets. So you say, well, I haven't got the budget for it. So because we save a bunch of money in other areas, because I'm doing most of this stuff in-house with a very small core team, we've got budget to spend on other things. So we got some external help, where we hire designers. We've got several designers that essentially sort of work in the company, but are not, we're paying an agency for that. So they're dedicated to our account effectively. And they work through that with the brand managers. And initially there was a little bit of friction, because brand managers, local brand managers, always have their own agencies, their own ways of working. And it takes a bit of time to break that down. But if you're funding it, and you do a couple of projects that get their trust, it doesn't take much to break that down. And now we do that pretty much across Europe. We work around the different teams and different markets, different brand teams, and they trust us. They trust us that our designers that we've brought in know the business. They've been with us a couple of years, and they work through all that stuff. So it's a really nice way of working. You're not going to automate that part, but we've got it working like a little factory, if you like. And then the great thing is, then once you've done the content, they put that into our DAM. It's signed off by marketeers. And again, I've set that up with the Amazon connection. You can push content to Amazon through the API. So I've got it links from our DAM, and it pushes every day to the Amazon, So any time anything gets overwritten or third parties come in and mess with the content, it doesn't matter, because the next day it's going to get overwritten by me. So we've got this closed loop of content, which is probably one of the things I'm most proud of, because that saves so much time, for account managers, for everybody really. And so that's been a major kind of breakthrough, doing it like that.
You mentioned earlier in our conversation that there were those three key areas that you were focused on around digital shelf, obviously first and foremost. You mentioned retail media. I'm curious to ask you about the third, which is thinking about the role you're being able to play from a tech or digital transformation perspective. And given some of the things you've described in terms of some of the ways that you guys are using AI to work smarter in the digital shelf, how have you seen that be able to then kind of go beyond just the eCom teams to the rest of the Ecotone organization?
It's a great question. I think the first thing is the people we're dealing with. I think this is pretty common. Then there's sometimes they might be dedicated e-commerce people, but a lot of the time they're not. A lot of the time they have another job. So you might be an account manager on Tesco, and you might have a side job as you might be looking at a small business on Amazon, something like that. But usually these people are not just 100% doing what they're not just on e-commerce. That's usually a side part of it.
They usually wear multiple hats in their roles.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a couple of days a week they do that. Sometimes they do something else. And everybody's always got other projects. Nobody's just doing one thing. So where we've had e-commerce being a kind of playground, there's all these problems you can solve, all this tech that you can build. The same people that we're doing that for are now aware of that. So you've embedded that in their thinking that we do that first. We can probably do that ourselves. You get out of this thinking of you've always got to pay someone else tens of thousands or whatever to do something. So you change that mindset, and then they bring that up in other projects. So we've got an example just recently where one of our main e-commerce people is also in the commercial team, and they were looking at a project to bring together all these different trade planning kind of all this data is in different places, and again they're looking at options to bring it together. And they said, well, hang on a minute, we're looking externally, but let's try and do it internally at the same time. So exactly what I would do. You assess externally, but you try and build internally at the same time. And then whatever works out first is, whatever works out the best, you go with that option. And we've done that. So we've brought these things together, and we created a tool, that we're just rolling out that does exactly what they wanted to do. And we built that custom. It's in-house. It doesn't really cost anything apart from the time to build it. So I think it permeates. If you show people what's possible in one part of the business, it gets around. And especially if it's potentially going to save some money, in this time of budgets being tight and everything, it doesn't take much for people to say, hang on a minute, I like the sound of that. Could you do something over here? And you say, yeah, sure. And I always found over my career, if you find a way to sort of find out what people want and you give it to them, they tend to like you. And they tend to help you, when you need them as well. So, trying to be useful to as many different people as possible has worked out quite well. And yeah, that's just one example. But all the time, there's a question of, hey, can we do this? Or, we're thinking about going into this category. Can you track that? And, I always try and say yes, 9 times out of 10.
And you've mentioned like building this digital in-house agency does take time and takes a certain effort, but now that you've built it, what do you see as like the ultimate benefits of having it for an FMCG company to have this like in-house agency that
Sure.
everything within the company?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I mean, there's obviously costs. Like what we're doing, it's a bit like running a non-profit. It costs what it costs. There's no profits involved or anything. We just do it for the base cost. So that's one benefit. It is definitely cheaper doing it like this. But I think more importantly is the time, because if we were doing all the things we were doing externally, I would spend most of my weeks on catch-ups, negotiating, doing contracts, all this kind of stuff, and everybody in the teams as well would be doing similar things. And we don't have that. We just focus on what is it we need to do, what's the vision and what we need to achieve, and then, okay, let's go and make that happen. So you save everybody a whole bunch of time, and you take work off them as well. So none of the guys I work with, none of the teams, the e-commerce community, there's no maintenance, there's nothing that they have to do. They just get answers. So you save them all the time, and you save them the stress of kind of having to think about this, so they can focus on the customer. They can focus on selling stuff. And we're here not to sort of talk about e-commerce all the time. We're here to sell stuff is the core, whether it's online, whether it's offline, and enable people to do that. So the big benefit is definitely you spend more time doing actions that actually drive something. There's none of these waste of time conversations that are not value add, admin, if you like, that we've kind of solved that problem. And everything we do now is like, how do you do this? How do you fix this? How do you drive that forward? What's next? Where do we go next? Do we need some money for this? Do we need to put some budget? We're focused on doing something about it, which I'm really proud of. Really, I think that's a really nice place to get to.
Well, it's a very powerful legacy for sure. So you should, you should be proud for sure. This has been a very insightful conversation. I've been taking copious notes throughout. We have one final question for you. This is the one that we ask all of our guests. And given everything that you've learned across having worked at Kantar, dunnhumby, Tesco.com, and now with Ecotone, if you could go back in time and give one piece of advice to your younger self when you were first starting your career, what would that be?
A really interesting. I mean, I'm pretty happy with the choices I've made over my career and sort of the place I've ended up. But for sure, the single most transformational thing that I've ever done is learn to code. Like learn to code in Python. And that was in lockdown, 2019 or so, whenever that started. That was my lockdown project, and that now is pretty much everything I do links to that. So if I could go back in time, to 2004 or something, I'd say learn that right now, because that will impact every single thing you do, and it will save you so much time. You can automate most of your job, so 100%. If I could go back in time, I would learn that skill way earlier, and then who knows kind of what other benefits there'd be. But yeah, learning to code 100% earlier on.
Well, this is normally our last questions, but I'll break the rules for once. How do you apply Python coding in your day-to-day job?
Well, if you say, for instance, you've got a spreadsheet you've got to fill in, and this is, go back to Kantar days. This is literally what interns did back then. Was you take data from one place, you put it in another, you might clean it, you might put it in a chart, you might put it in some other kind of colorful template. A really simple example would be you can record all of those things in code and make it do it for you, and then make it schedule it every day and make it email it out. So there's times when I first started Ecotone, I would all these reports and that would generate each day. I would go on holiday for a week and it would still happen, and people say, I thought you were on holiday. So you can make it look like you're doing a load of work when you've automated it. And so not that I do that, but it's you can apply it to so many different things. If you've got some repetitive task, it can be automated, and that's kind of my whole thing nowadays. If there's something that, if it's the same thing, I don't want to do it more than once. I'll invest the time in automating it, not the time doing it, kind of thing.
Well, I think that Efrain and I are thinking the same thing. Maybe we should sign up for a Python.
I have a very good friend of mine who had that same piece of advice during COVID. So you are not alone. John.
There you go. Yeah. So Efrain, can we go through your copious notes and extract your key takeaways of this conversation?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, I think it all starts with just how much of a bootstrap, do-it-yourself approach, John, you embody in terms of how you guys have really built this digital shelf toolkit. It really is. It's amazing to hear, and it's really, really inspiring. Starting with learning how to code in Python, but just in terms of what you've been able to accomplish in a short amount of time, relatively, 2.5 years. And building this from scratch, that it's really, really amazing to hear. And it's no different than, like, as you were saying, what people are looking for when they think about off-the-shelf products as well. You've just been able to take it, internalize it, and do it in maybe a smart, more agile sort of way.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and also I think one thing that I really liked is the fact that you have things very clear. I mean, clearly it goes back to understanding your business and the area of your business, right? So you really broke down the areas of digital shelf of like search results, product page, rating and reviews, and then acting as a translator of like, what does everyone want? So sales want pricing and availability. Marketing about reviews and what's going on with the shopper. The e-commerce community, like the content side. So really like being that translator, I'm sure that the teams benefit a lot from that. At least I benefit a lot from that. So here's that.
Well, and I think what's nice about it is that there's clear benefit in all those cases, right? So I loved your phrase, John, when you talked about the closed loop for content and being able to, by what you're doing, closing that loop and ensuring that the content that people see on these retailer sites is always up to date, because even if it gets overwritten, you're going to come back because you've automated it and you're going to fix it the next the next fortnight, so that the next morning it's going to be the way that it should be. So I think it's having those clear benefits. And obviously the other thing that you mentioned here is having data to support your actions, right? So being able to go to that buyer, or being able to go to that sales RGM team and saying, look, guys, if we don't fix this, we're losing $10,000 a day, right? Because basically that out of stock is costing us that much, and you multiply that by 365, and you tell me how much that is, right? And it all of a sudden people start paying attention. I think being able to have data-driven decision making is really, really powerful.
Yeah, ultimately you said that what you do and what your core goal is to scrape data reliably every day, right? Because I think that if you have that data fundamental, that's something that I've learned doing the podcast. If you have that data fundamental, you can really, that's something that you build upon later, no? But even if that's broken, you can't really build anything from there. So just having that backbone, I think that it's really key, because then you can extract conclusions, empower your teams, et cetera, and build AI. Because without the proper data, you can't do it. So Jon, hope we summarize this well enough.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, data as a foundation is the last point there is really, really important, So fantastic.
Perfect. Well, cherry on the top. Thanks, Jon, for joining us. This was super cool. And I think it's a typical podcast where our audience will really want to go back and re-listen to some key parts of it. So audience, you're free to do that. We give you permission. We also give you permission to leave us a review if you've enjoyed this podcast. If you just give us 5 stars. That's all we ask for. 5 stars.
We're simple people. 5 stars is all we ask.
5 stars. We make it easy for you. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG Guys every Wednesday and Saturday. Have a great day.